here at Conner Library. I'd like to welcome you all to our World Usability Day event. This event is sponsored by the Conner Library's Accessibility Committee and Disability Support Services here on campus. I'd like to thank the committee members who organized this event: Linda Spiro, the chair, Deborah Cola, Diane Butler, Ginny Martin, Jane Siegel, Peggy Shaw, Jane Zhao, Melinda Flannery, and Jeff Koppler and Nadalia Liu for their technical assistance, and Jeff Anderson and Alan Russell from Campus Disability Support Services. I'm honored to introduce Kevin Kirby, the MC for today's event. Kevin is the Vice President for Administration at Rice University. In this capacity, Kevin is responsible for most of the non-academic functions on campus that are vital to keeping the university running, such as human resources, the campus police, facilities and planning, housing and dining, administrative computing, and parking, to name a few of his areas. Prior to joining Rice, Dr. Kirby was the Chief Operating Officer for the Columbia University Medical Center and served as Executive Officer for the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke at the National Institutes of Health. He held several management positions with the Army Research Laboratory and served on the staff of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. He served as Science Advisor for the Commanding General, Army Forces Command, and started his career conducting research on low-temperature behavioral materials at the Army Materials Lab. I didn't know you were such a scientist, Kevin. Kevin holds a BS in Chemical Engineering from Syracuse University, an MS in Management from the MIT, another master's degree in Social and Organizational Learning from George Mason University, and a doctorate in higher education from the University of Pennsylvania. Kevin is a key member of the senior administration here and brought many new programs to campus, including the Rice Leaders Program and the Teams Program. So Kevin, welcome. Thank you for emceeing today.
I always think, thanks Sarah, I always think that there would be one day when I get through a day without somebody mentioning parking. In 6 years I'll more on. So, okay. So thanks for introducing me, Sarah, and thanks for letting me host this again this year. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my experience with the subject matter before I introduce our speakers. And so I thought I'd start off with what I started off doing in life. Wade, you'd appreciate this, but I was working for the Army, and usability for the Army is a matter of life and death. It's not a matter of convenience or, gee, it works a little better. It's a matter of life and death. In the upper left-hand corner was the first time I went on travel, and I was testing things in the Army's Cold Regions Test Center in Bolio Lake, which is you fly into Fairbanks and then drive an hour up into the mountains of Alaska, where they promise in January it's going to be 60 below zero. And it was. And what you quickly discovered is that you can get equipment to work, but you can't get people to work or people to interface with machines when you're wearing really bulky clothing. And so this was sort of my first introduction to what life was like, trying to do something in pretty extreme environments. On the bottom left is an Apache Longbow attack helicopter. It's about this wide. It's one of the most deadly machines on Earth. And the pilot, who you see on the left-hand side. Now imagine how hard it is to fly a helicopter normally. Now imagine what it's like if you're flying what's called nap of the Earth, meaning you're terrain following up and down over the tree line. And imagine you're doing that at night. And imagine you're doing that wearing a night vision goggle, which is what the guy on the left, the soldier on the left, is wearing. How hard that is to do while keeping track of a couple hundred different instruments, all at the same time. So again, a matter of life and death. And then on the right-hand side, you're only seeing a little bit of protection gear from chemical and biological weapons. And so you can imagine being in a desert environment, wearing the suit from head to toe, and how do you communicate, how do you get water when you're dehydrated, and this is a little drinking device we were developing so that you can be hydrated while you were wearing what's called MOP 4 gear. And so in the Army, I was working with the only sort of professionalized usability human factors group in the world. We had 250 scientists and engineers who did nothing but worry about human factors and how people interfaced with machines and other things. And these were but a few of the things that we were working on. And so this is what I started off doing life on. So I've been a sort of a lifelong proponent of usability for almost 30 years. This is the same kind of thing if this guy's trying to fly the helicopter. And so what began to happen in the late 80s, if you come into my office, you'll see about a dozen books on usability. So the first book I ever saw on usability was this book by Daniel Norman, who was a psychologist. And this is when it first started becoming mainstream in the United States. It sort of started hitting the popular press. And he was on the 3 Mile Island evaluation team, where he said that as part of the evaluation that it wasn't really design error, which is what most people were saying, that in fact, I'm sorry, it wasn't human error that caused the accident at 3 Mile Island, it was really design error there. So that was in 1988. And then usability, ergonomics, software ergonomics that came into being in the middle 90s. So if you come to my office again, you'll see these 2 books about software ergonomics. And then it started to become more of a profession. So a company that's been around for several decades now called IDEO, which is quite famous. And if you saw, there was a famous video that was made about 10 years ago showing that shopping cart there, about the design of a shopping cart. It was on Nightline. But it involved things like watching people and how they go about shopping. So one of the things they discovered was people like to leave their carts in one place and go pick up something rather than take the whole cart. So then there's little baskets you can take out and take with you. And that guy, Tom Kelly, and his brother David founded IDEO, and now has started the design school at Stanford, which is arguably one of the most popular schools at Stanford. So that was back in 2001. And in 2004, a guy named Eric Schaefer, a guy I've been working with for about 15 years, he runs the biggest usability firm in the world. He's got about 175 professionals who know nothing but usability testing and design. And so he's been running his firm for a couple decades now. And so what you see is usability going from an interesting subject to becoming professionalized and people specializing in these fields, certifications being given. Which sort of brings us to today. So now there are conferences on the subject. There are 175,000 participants, I think, in World Usability Day in 40 different countries today. And so it's become a sort of much more mainstream. And you see it all around campus, and you'll see that being talked about from many of our speakers today, to lots of practices that we use in designing websites, etc. So which brings us to our first speaker, which is Marita Oden for today. And Maria runs as a professor in practice here at Rice, and she's director of the Oshman Design Kitchen. So this has been around for a few years. It's quickly become one of the most popular experiences at Rice. In fact, it's become so popular, we're about to expand it by about 50% in the coming 12 months, so that because the demand has outstripped the space. But not only that, but it's created other requests for similar kinds of experimental space around the campus. So for sure, we're in the process of creating a new arts center over by the police station on the other side of campus. And one of the key parts of that's going to be an arts kitchen, which is designed, will be designed specifically like this. We've had other people from the humanities already going to be like to have a design like kitchen, and we've talked about creating those kinds of spaces around campus and a number of places, including here in the library. So I think you'll see more of these coming around campus. Maria got her PhD from Tulane in biomedical engineering. She went on to be a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Medical School. And you'll see some of the examples of the kinds of projects that have come out of the designs in the kitchen. So,
thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much for including me in this talk today. I'm going to divide my talk into two parts. One is specifically to talk about the design kitchen, because at the design kitchen, it's really a facility to enable students to work on projects, such as the kind of projects that Kevin talked about and many others. And you're going to hear from some of those students later. So I'm going to give you a bit of a background on the design kitchen, what it is, and what we try to enable our students to do. In the second half of my talk, I'm going to discuss the Global Health Technologies program here at Rice, and specifically give you one example of a technology that was designed by a group of students that is now helping a tremendous number of people in Malawi. So I'm hoping that by giving you kind of the overview of the design kitchen and then one example of something that's come out of the design kitchen, it may give you a sense of what is possible. So often, when I'm talking about the design kitchen, the first question I get is, what on earth is the design kitchen? I mean, here at Rice, more people know about it, but the design kitchen used to be an actual kitchen. It was the central kitchen of Rice University, and when we turned it into an engineering design facility for our undergraduate students, we really liked the concept of a kitchen where you put together disparate things in a recipe and you create something that's even better than the parts. And I see that happening at the kitchen, the design kitchen, all the time. It's not just about the parts, it's not about the equipment, it's about the learning that students do, it's about the teamwork that they do, and working with real clients that have real needs, and our students are needing to learn and understand what those needs are. And then usually they design something, and it might meet the technical specifications or the technical need, yet the user says, wait a minute, there are problems with this, and the students need to go back. They've created an engineering solution that meets the technical kind of letter of the law, yet it might not actually be useful. And so then they often have to go back and redesign their work. So here's what we have. So technically, very specifically, we have 12,000 square feet. Soon, hopefully, to be 15 to 16,000 square feet. Space for undergraduate students working on engineering design projects of all types. So not many students who work in the design kitchen are not necessarily engineering students, but they are working on engineering design kinds of projects. We have two very important beliefs, I would say, in terms of the kinds of projects we want our students to work on. We really would like for our students to work on real projects. Projects that have a real need, either in the community, let's say a physician has an idea or a challenge and our students tackle it, or something that comes from the energy industry, or it's an individual patient at the Shriners Hospital for Children. Some true need. So it's not an academic exercise. It's actually, if the students come up with a good solution, somebody would like to implement this real solution. What happens to the students is that they get engaged in a project way beyond how they would be engaged in a project that their professor just cooks up in their office and assigns to them, and they have to do it because they have to get a grade. Right now you have a real project, there's a real need, a real user, and you get engaged in that. And I have proof that this is true because grades are usually due for our senior students early in May, and then it's about 9 or 10 days before graduation. And every year, in those 9 or 10 days, I'll have senior design teams in there working, putting finishing touches on their project way after their grades were due. They're not affecting their grades anymore. What they're trying to do is get their project as perfect as possible to deliver to the client. You'll hear a little bit later from some students who worked on freshman design projects, and they just don't stop. They keep going and going and going because they want this project that they're working on to really work. We work in a wide variety of areas. Energy and medical are primary areas because of where we are here in Houston. We think of the design kitchen as a place to reduce the barriers for success in engineering design for our students. And it's a really great place. I'm not going to talk about every single thing we have in there. If you have not been there, please come visit. It's just at the edge of campus. It's very easy to get to, I promise. And we'll be happy to show you around. But there are many tools there that will help students be able to realize their designs. They can make 3D models of their designs, etc. Lots of fun in that space. Our students work on real challenges. We talked about that. As much as possible, if we can put students on interdisciplinary teams, we find that their success rate goes up and they learn more professional skills, which is working on a team of people that don't have the same skills that they have. So we try to do that as much as possible. Making engineering real to younger students. This is, you'll hear about this in a minute, with the freshman design efforts. And we're seeing, we've been open for 3 years, more and more professors weaving design activities throughout the curriculum, which is a whole lot more fun, believe me, than doing problem sets. So it's something that's been really beneficial to our students. And we've been encouraging our clubs to take advantage of the fact that we have this facility. So it's not just for courses. Any student who's in a club that's doing engineering design work can have access to the space. And we push our students to think beyond technical. What are the business implications of what they're doing? How does their project fit within, let's say, public policy or the social arena? So beyond just the technical. Okay, so I'll now move to the second part of my talk, which is a group who use the Engineering Design Kitchen quite a lot. And that's our RICE 360 program, particularly the Beyond Traditional Borders undergraduate program, where we encourage students to work on engineering design challenges that will allow healthcare delivery in the world's lowest resource settings. And just kind of in a nutshell, what we do is we identify challenges that healthcare workers have in these very low resource settings, and we pose those as challenges for our students. And the students, if they're very prolific in their design work and they're come up with solutions and they are very successful, some of them have an opportunity then to take those designs into the field and evaluate them. Most often, all that they're able to do is take a technology and demonstrate it for physicians and nurses and get feedback. And basically the recipe, the thing that almost always happens is that students will design a technology. They're very excited about it. They think it's the best thing that ever was. And they arrive at a clinic or a hospital, and the doctors or the nurses will say, ooh, that is never going to work here. And now these students have 8 or 9 weeks left to make good on whatever they were supposed to do, which is develop this project or product a little bit more. But what they learn when they're on the ground there is how to make something really work in that environment. And we challenge them to try to take what you have and make the best of it. Do something with what you've developed. They come back, and now they have a real understanding of what that environment is like. And they can actually take these projects much further. So a few fun pictures of some of the adventures that our students have had. I'll talk about a few of them in just a second. They have gone all over the world with this program. Students have been in many places, and the experiences they've had for all of these students have been transformative. So now I'm going to go to the one specific example that I'm going to show today. There are many. You can go to the OEDK website and see many, many examples. But this is a student team. They graduated, these 4 students graduated in May of 2010. This was the first year the Design Kitchen was open for an entire year. Okay, so this was a team that came out at the beginning. And what they developed, the challenge they were working on is coming up with a device that was very low cost and usable in an extremely low resource setting to help newborns that were having difficulty breathing, to help them breathe. This device is a bubble CPAP device. It's a technology that's used extensively in US hospitals. So it's not a new concept or technology, but the device that's used in the States is either $8,000 or more, or requires having wall air and wall oxygen available at all times, which hospitals in really low resource settings just don't have. So this device is being held by the student Jocelyn. It looks like it's in a plastic shoebox from Target, and the reason it looks like that is because it is in a plastic shoebox from Target. And all of the magic that's in there cost about $140 to put together. So all of the parts, about $140. This device provides the airflow and the pressure that's equivalent to the technology used at Texas Children's Hospital today for premature infants. This device will not breathe for the infant, but it gives them support. It keeps their lungs inflated so that they can breathe more easily and rest and heal their lungs, and then they can come off the system. This team was 5 students. 4 of them were engineering students, and 1 of them was a global health technology student. This device, over the period of the last couple of years, has been redesigned to be a little bit more user-friendly, look a little more like a medical technology. I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that doing a clinical trial with the shoebox kind of device would be too awe-inspiring. So we did do some redesign. But essentially, this device that you see here is identical in terms of the technical components. And so this is the redesigned device, and we were able to get a grant in order to do an initial clinical trial in Malawi. The reason we were able to do this is because we had, over quite a long period of time, developed a great relationship with a pediatrician there who brought us the problem in the first place. So we were able to take back this device and say, okay, here's what we have. She gave us feedback, we fixed it. It was a process. It was not a one-shot deal, and it was a true partnership between the physicians in the field and our students. This is just my fancy graph showing you that the pressures and flows were functionally equivalent to what we get at Texas Children's Hospital. So one of those lines is our bubble CPAP, and the other one is the Texas Children's system. So here's the device on a patient in Malawi. I'm going to show you a little bit of video, so it's going to be even more interesting, I think, to see the device in action in a moment. What we were able to do in our trial is track babies over time. So when they were put on the CPAP system, then we followed their vital signs. So the big thing to note, this was one of the very first patients that were on, and in the middle of this graph, this middle graph here, it shows you oxygen saturations. And right here it shows the baby's oxygen saturation before they went on CPAP. So it was about 65%. 65% oxygen saturation is extremely low, and this child would not have lived for very long. Within an hour of having the system put on, her saturations were close to 90, and over the next 5 days, she was able to heal and recover and went home 5 days later. This was a 6-month-old baby with bronchiolitis, and so once she was able to be supported in her breathing, she was able to heal very quickly. So in the rest of my time that I have to talk, I'm actually just going to show you a video about the technology, because I think it's going to show you a lot more about it. But a few things to notice are, first of all, in the process of designing this technology, the students took into account the fact that there are not a lot of biomedical technicians on site to repair the equipment, that the nurses on site are extremely well trained, but there are very few nurses for the number of patients. So the neonatal ward that we'll show you, very often there are 50 or 60 patients at a time for 1 or 2 nurses. So the device had to be very easy to put together. The students worked with experts to figure out the best way of having connections so that you couldn't connect things in the wrong place. And it's really simple and straightforward, both to use and to repair.
This is Fanny. Most of her 3 weeks of life have been spent in Queen Elizabeth Hospital with a lung infection. She came here from a health center when only 7 days old, pale and struggling to breathe. In the developed world, Fanny will be put onto a CPAP machine, which stands for continuous positive airway pressure, to help keep her lungs inflated. But these machines cost about $6,000 each. Too much for most African hospitals. So the staff here have been looking for an alternative.
There's a lot of need for any other type of technology, because in our hospitals we're lacking a lot of facilities. As of now, most of the hospitals are just using simple oxygen, which is not enough to help in very small babies with stiff lungs, who needs a little bit of pressure to keep the lungs open so they can breathe.
Fanny was lucky. At Queen Elizabeth, we are now evaluating a low-cost CPAP which she was put onto. The machine was developed after the doctors here asked a visiting group of medical engineers from Rice University in Texas to see if they could come up with a more affordable CPAP delivery system.
This is a CPAP machine that we've developed at Rice University. It costs approximately $160 as compared to the $6,000 CPAP machines that are used in the developed world. And The feature that has allowed this machine to be so inexpensive is the fact that the airflow is provided by 2 aquarium pumps, which are very low cost, and they're designed to run for years at a time, and they're also easy to repair. The machine is also very simple to put together and to use. So the pressure that the patient receives into their lungs is provided by a height of water column, which is determined by the height of water in this bottle. And typically patients receive between 5 and 8 centimeters of water pressure. The water is placed in this bottle holder here, and tubing is connected from the CPAP machine to the bottle. The other tubing that goes to the patient is attached here, where there's a picture of a baby. So it's impossible to get the 2 attachments mixed up. And then at the end of the tubing, the nasal prongs are attached here. And then this is placed on the patient, and the prongs are inserted into the nose. And then the machine is plugged in the back, and switch on the machine. And then the flow is set with this flow meter here. If the patient needs additional oxygen, that can be connected here to this port. And then the oxygen is controlled with this meter here. And finally, it's very simple to know that the patient is receiving air, because when the prongs are in place, the water bubbles.
The nasal prongs are attached to the baby using a tiny stretchy hat, and then safety pins and elastic bands. These keep the prongs, which come in different sizes, in place. The first stage in the project was to train a small team how to do this.
In 5 days training, we learned how to assemble the machine, the CPAP machine, how to put the machine together, how to put the machine on the baby. So you find difficulties only when putting to the baby. That is rather difficult because the baby is sometimes moving and shaking about it, but when you have mastered it, it's just as easy as such.
The machines are primarily intended to be used for newborn or premature babies, but they can also be used for older babies and young children with respiratory distress. At Queen Elizabeth Hospital, we have had 4 machines in continuous use over the last 3 months. We're doing a study to evaluate what difference they make to outcome, and should have results by the end of the year. If successful, we hope to roll out the use of CPAP to other hospitals in Malawi and beyond. If we can mass produce the machines, we should be able to further reduce the costs. Children can go on CPAP for as long as they need help in breathing. Fanny initially went on for 3 days, but then the chest infection recurred, so she had to go on again for a total of 11 days. Now she really is getting better.
Mwana isa mapuma bwino amathamanga kwambiri kupuma kwache koma ata mutamutenga kumwika pasipa pa mwana iyo akupuma bwino samayamwa koma panopo yamba kuyamwa ndipo ndikuona ngati panopo ayi chithandizo choyenerereka kwambiri chifukwa chokuti mwana amene ni mmene analili sindimaziwa kuti angakhale chonchi.
Fanny is now feeding well and will soon be able to start her life outside hospital. But too many babies still do not make it this far. We hope that CPAP can help to change this.
So this is my last slide. This is the new redesigned CPAP system. This system is back into our target range in terms of cost. And we've recently learned that we are going to be getting some funding to be able to scale up the CPAP to all of the hospitals in Malawi. So the initial nurses who used it and the doctors who used it provided feedback, and cycled that loop again to make sure that this was as easy to use as it could possibly be, and would be as effective as it could possibly be. So I'm going to stop there, but just leave you with the message of what appropriate challenges put in front of our students, sort of give them as big of a bar to climb over as we can possibly give, and they will meet that bar.
Our next speaker is Ann Satterback, who's a professor in the practice of bioengineering education here at Rice, and she's also the associate chair for undergraduate affairs. Ann's one of the great teachers at Rice, having won awards at all levels, at the department level, at the national level. She won an award from the American Society for Engineering Education. Here at Rice, one of our highest awards, the George R. Brown Prize for Excellence in Teaching. She received her PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Illinois at her Urbana-Champaign, and she teaches the Introduction to Engineering Design course, which takes place in the design kitchen, and she, along with several of her students, are going to tell us about that. Yeah.
Thanks. This works out very well that I followed Maria Odin, giving you a little bit of the context of the Engineering Design Kitchen. About 2 years ago, I was given the challenge of putting together a new freshman engineering design course. And the guiding principles for putting together that course are listed here on the slide. We were really interested in students working in teams, in particular working in multidisciplinary teams. We were also very committed to having the students, again, work on authentic, real-world projects, rather than kind of make projects that you may find. We were really interested in trying to promote innovation and also begin to inculcate the importance of communication very early in the curriculum. So as a result, we put together ENGI 120, which is Introduction to Engineering Design. So for those of you who were here last year, you saw an example of one of the projects that we work on. So this course, like I said, began, it was 4 semesters ago. It's a 1-semester course, so it's very short. Since the students are freshmen, it's important to find projects where iteration is important, right? Because they don't have some of the more sophisticated disciplinary content knowledge that you would have at a capstone level. But it is, like I said, very important for us to find some of these client-based design projects. So here's kind of an overview of the engineering design process that we use. If you look up on the left-hand side towards the top, it's really important for students to, again, to work with the clients to really understand what it is that the client wants. And this is where this concept of usability really comes in. Because a number of the projects that we work on are really geared towards people with disabilities or who may have different ways of interacting with the world than, say, I might. So it's really important to talk with the clients and understand what it is that they need. Then we go through kind of the standard design process, and we focus a lot at ENGI 120 on the kind of the prototyping, developing solutions, and trying to get them to work. Because it's a 1-semester course, a few of the projects are able to be kind of turned over to the client, like you see in the capstone design. But others of them are not, but it still provides this really important process for students to learn the engineering design process. So we've partnered with a lot of different people in the ENGI 120 class. We try to focus on kind of local partners, places where the students can't get to easily. So for example, the Houston Zoo, the Texas Medical Center is right across the way. We've worked with some industry partners, some not-for-profit partners, as well as Engineers Without Borders and Beyond Traditional Borders, 2 groups that are on campus. And so rather than me telling you about some of the fun projects that the students are working on, I'm actually going to let the freshman teams tell you about the projects that they worked on last year. So there are going to be 2 teams that are going to tell you a little bit about their work. We have the first team who is already setting up. And they developed a reaching aid for a boy with brittle bone disease. And then the second team is going to talk about a dressing aid for children with arthrogryposis. So both teams actually brought the things that they kind of built and prototyped, so hopefully that will be fun, that we can they'll give a little context to their project and then also demonstrate their solution. But what's I guess kind of the theme for both of these projects, just why I believe I was invited today, is that both of these projects really address this issue of usability. Okay, so these particular projects were designed for people that have some type of physical difference or disability, and really trying to make the world a little bit easier, right, for these individuals, for them to be more independent as they grow up from children. So again, both of these projects were done in conjunction with Shriners Hospital, which has a focus in this area. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to the first team. Nimesh, you're going to present? Okay.
So thank you for having us here. My name is Nimesh Mittal, and I'm going to be presenting on behalf of my entire team, which features Matt Najumi, Sergio Gonzalez, Samuel De La Torre, and Nick Link, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. So our team developed and designed the R-Arm, which stands for the Robotic Assistive Reaching Mechanism. This device was designed for our client, which is a 15-year-old boy who goes by the nickname of D. D suffers from a disease known as Osteogenesis Imperfecta, which is more commonly referred to as OI, or brittle bone disease. OI is a genetic disorder which prevents the proper formation of the bones and causes them to be weak and break easily. It also inhibits the growth and strength of the patient. In our client specifically, D is only approximately 3 feet in height, and his arms are only approximately 1 foot in length. As a result of these limitations, D spends most of his time in a wheelchair, the Permobil K450. As you can imagine, this severely limits his ability to reach things. If he were to drop something on the floor, he wouldn't be able to reach it. He can't pick up anything off of the counter, out of a cabinet, or out of a drawer. So, in order to combat this, we established a goal of trying to develop a reaching aid for D that would enable him to reach out approximately 5 feet in length and lift many of the following everyday items. Items at his school, like pencils, papers, or his books. Normal food items around the house, like canned food, chips bags, or other box goods, or just normal household items in general, like a remote, or his clothes, or even a ball. Based on this goal, we designed the R-Arm, which is a 2-joint robotic arm which would be attached to the back of Dee's wheelchair. The arm then at the end features a 4-bar linkage gripper which Dee could use to reach out and pick anything within a radius of approximately 5 feet that weighs up to 5 pounds at max. In terms of usability and iteration, when we first presented the design to Dee's father, he brought us back some feedback, and one of the concerns was that the arm was really big and he has to transport the wheelchair and the arm to different places. So in order to combat that, we went back to the design and we fixed it. And we added these quick release pins which go at the bottom of the arm, around the base, and basically you just pull the pins out and the entire upper portion of the arm can be detached from the arm. By detaching the arm, he can take separate pieces and it's much more easy to transport. The way that Dee operates his arm is with a custom-made user interface that sits on his armrest. It features 5 main buttons. The first, which we'll demonstrate as we move along, is a button that rotates the bottom beam of the arm, which allows his arm to move in a direction like this. And you can see the arm rotates around, and it can rotate in both directions. The second button on the user interface rotates the top portion of the arm, which functions similarly to your wrist would in your arm. Give them a second to set up. The arms able to move forwards and backwards, allowing you to reach things like within a drawer that require moving down as well as moving up. The third button is a knob that Dee can use to open and close a gripper like you would with your hand, which unfortunately requires a lot of programming, which we still need to fix. So we're just and then the fourth fourth button is just a basic on-off switch. It functions so that he can save power on the battery that he would use, but it also serves as a very vital safety mechanism. If the arm were to, for some reason, malfunction, we run all the electrical components through this one switch, so he can turn the switch off and it would function as a sort of emergency kill switch. The last button is actually pretty unique. Again, we wanted to make the device as easy for D as possible, and we realized that in some circumstances the object that the arm would be picking up would be too heavy for D to operate the knob with one hand and then reach out and grab the device off of the arm with the other. So we've put a quick release foot switch near the base of his wheelchair, near his foot, which he can just tap with his foot. It causes the gripper to release the device, and then he can use both hands instead of just one to bring it off the gripper and into his lap. So basically, as a wrap-up, our client had limited reach and strength because of osteogenesis imperfecta. And so we designed the R-arm to help D lead a more comfortable and independent life. We believe that the R-arm has allowed for an overall increase in his quality of life by helping him accomplish simple tasks like picking up a book, the fact that it's easily transportable, that it can attach to either side of his wheelchair, which I didn't mention, the user interface, and another way for him to adapt to the fact that he has osteogenesis imperfecta is that he often breaks one of his arms. So if we would have left the user interface only on the right side of his wheelchair, if he broke his right arm, he would unfortunately not be able to use the device. So we've made the user interface so that he can move to either side of his wheelchair. So if he were to break one arm, he can still operate it with the other one. And then finally, overall, most importantly, the R-arm decreases his overall reliance on others. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Audrey Clayton, and along with Jonathan Berg, I'll be presenting about a dressing aid we designed to help patients with arthrogryposis, along with two other students, Carly Beadle and Mike Sang. So first off, what is arthrogryposis? Arthrogryposis is a condition that about 1 in 3,000 people are born with. It's characterized by either non-existent or underdeveloped muscles and either fixed joints or joints with very limited range of motion. So these overall cause general lack of strength in patients. They can't pull or push things necessarily, and a very limited range of motion. And in severe cases, it can also lead to trouble with walking. So, as you can imagine, this creates large difficulties with dressing. Patients generally can't necessarily hold clothing and can't necessarily move their arms in the ways they need to put clothing on. So many patients will require assistance with dressing, and if they don't, it can take up to 10 minutes or even longer just to simply put their clothes on. And in many cases, they'll rely on furniture and nearby objects to prop up their arms or hold bits of clothing in certain ways. There do exist some current marketed solutions. One of them is a button hook, which essentially you have a buttonhole and you stick it through the hole and pull the button through. These, however, are kind of limited in usefulness because it only helps with buttoning buttons, and they're also designed for arthritis patients, so they don't necessarily address the gripping challenges that arthrogryposis patients face. Another solution are suction hooks, and basically what it is it's a suction cup with a hook attached to it that patients can stick wherever they want on the wall, and it allows them to hook their clothes on it, just kind of to help them hold their clothes in a particular orientation so they can kind of wriggle in. But this also has limited usefulness because it doesn't necessarily cut down on the time that it takes patients to get dressed, and it also requires a lot of patient ingenuity. So what we set out to do was to design something that would help patients put on shirts more easily. So we wanted the patients to be able to use it completely independently, and we wanted it to be useful for different levels of arthrogryposis so that very able people and not so able people would both be able to use it. Our goal was that it would help them dress 50% faster than they already do, that it would be low cost, so less than $100, that it would be durable enough to withstand 3 years of use and be easy and comfortable to use. So now Jonathan will explain what we came up with.
So before you, we have the device that we developed in our ENGI 120 class, which I will demonstrate in a moment, which we have named the shirt mate. And it allows moderately able patients to more easily put on a t-shirt. It consists of a PVC frame with a sturdy wooden base and has 4 metal hooks that hold the shirt, which the patient puts on. The device is also adjustable horizontally and vertically so that patients of different ages and sizes can use it. The total cost of the materials for this device was $70, so certainly low cost. And now Audrey will demonstrate how it is used. So first the patient opens the shirt and puts the waist of the shirt over the 4 hooks. This holds the shirt in place, and then the patient goes on to the other side. And she can then use her trunk strength, which many arthrogryposis patients have, to swing her arms into the shirt. And then she can find the sleeves with her arms, and when she has those through, she can put her head in through the head hole and then walk out, and voila, her shirt is on. Once we demonstrated the feasibility of this device on ourselves, we went to Shriners Hospital where we were working to test our device on a few patients there. And so we have a video here of one of the patients, Ruben, who's a 13-year-old boy, trying out our device. So Ruben he cannot walk here, although he was sitting down while he used the device. So here we put the shirt on the device for him. And you can see he was able to bring his arms high enough to get into the shirts. And then once he found the sleeves, he was then able to duck his head down into the shirt and pull it off. That we then helped him take the shirt off and put it completely on. So we tested it here at Shriners Hospital on Ruben as well as another patient, Matthew, who was a younger and more severely disabled. And when we tested it at Shriners, we were able to see some of the main problems with our device. The biggest one, which you noticed at the beginning, was that we had to put the shirt on the device for him, because despite our efforts, the children with arthrogryposis still lack the gripping power necessary to open up the base of the shirt and put it over the hooks. Also, Ruben was able to, with his strength, able to complete the other functions of the device. But the other patient, Matthew, who had a more severe condition, didn't have the proper strength or range of motion to do what Ruben was able to do. However, we did demonstrate by using the device on ourselves and with Ruben that the concept of the shirt mate is a feasible one to help a patient with arthrogryposis put on a t-shirt. The main functions of it work, it is low cost, and the physical structure is stable. And so we've left it with Dr. Viola, who we're working with at Shriners Hospital, to try it out on more patients to see what could possibly be improved. Because with this device, we could potentially improve the lives of children with arthrogryposis to help them have an easier and more independent life. Thank you.
So thanks to everyone. I know that a couple of my students actually do the class, so if you guys can leave. And if there are any questions, I thought we would go ahead and take questions now for the 2 student projects.
One of the goals was that it would work for people with varying abilities. On like the scale of variabilities, where did Ruben fit in? Is he in the middle, top, bottom?
So Ruben was unable to walk, which is somewhat common for children with arthrogryposis, so in that sense it was severe. But as you saw, he had a moderate amount of upper body strength. So in that sense he was on the more able scale. But there are definitely some children with such severe conditions that we would be unable to help them realistically to dress independently.
Have y'all thought about patenting your devices at all? Just had a question about whether or not you're considering patenting your devices or what your plans are with the business plan.
Obviously, this was our first round prototype. We have been approached by other people about whether to patent it or develop it further, and we're definitely interested in taking any opportunity to further our device. And that's something that we're working towards, is continue making this even better.
Okay, our third speaker is Austin Gavella, who's been designing great user interfaces for more than a decade. Austin's currently an experienced design manager with Band-Aid. He's been designing global, multilingual sites and applications for the World Bank, Verizon, and others. He's the co-author of the second edition of Information Architecture, Blueprints for the Web. He's also a development engineer for Boxes and Arrows, which is one of the web's leading design publications. He also has his own blog, Thinking and Making, where he writes about better teams, products, and experiences. Austin.
Well, I'm gonna talk about websites. One of the things I really like about full usability is there's always lots of cool non-web stuff, which in my daily life is sorely lacking. But one of the things that I think usability really brings into focus is that it's about thinking. The whole thing is about what questions you ask. Like, what if this happens? What if that happens? So the slides I put together here are just based on years of experience, the questions that either I didn't ask, and so during testing or development, we found a failure that we had to address, or questions that we discovered that we did need to ask, we didn't necessarily think we needed to ask, before we started. So hopefully, hopefully as we go forward, you can use these questions, this thinking approach, projects that you come across. So the slides are up on SlideShare if you want to download them later or now and follow along. So there are two definitions that are important for websites, and this is actually true for any probably software design project anywhere. Multilingual means, right, that it's available in multiple languages. So that's pretty straightforward. The next one, though, is localized, which means that the experience is somehow tailored for where you're located. A lot of times people will say that they're going to localize a website, but that really means they're going to translate it. So it's very common if you're going to localize a website to Spanish, they're just going to translate it to Spanish. You're not really changing how the content is served based on where you're located. And the same thing happens with multilingual. A lot of times people will assume that because you're translating it for Chinese that you're going to get other facets of the Chinese language sucked into the application, which is not true, right? You have to specify all of that. And one of the big things that I've learned working on some of these sites is that despite the fact that large, global, multinational enterprises are the types of people that will do lots of kind of translations and localization, there is no service that actually does it for you. So, for example, there isn't anything that can tell you whether or not the label on a zip code field should be zip code in the US, and postal code in the UK, and maybe something else somewhere else. No one knows. Even though there's only 100 and something countries, you can get the list pretty easily. There's no service that provides that. And that you'll find that so it's all pretty much done from scratch, which is kind of a pain. I guess ignore the comment bar there. I don't know why that's there. Oh, it likes it out. So this is a World Bank site. This site is multilingual, it's not localized. So that means that they translated everything. So as you can see here at the top, they have the primary languages. Then they have a drop-down that gets you to like a ton more languages. Of course, the World Bank is massive, and they have lots of people with foreign language expertise, so they just translate everything. It's not localized though. Like the content you see here is the same no matter where you write from. This is their homepage. There are many parts of the site that are localized. The homepage is not localized. So they have it's pretty easy for them. They launch a new site, they decide what languages they're going to translate into, they get it all translated. It's essentially the same site, just appears in different languages. This is the Infrastructure Institute, which has, like the World Bank, is an international organization, so they want to have translated. It's multilingual, it's not localized. They do not have, it's a volunteer organization, so they do not have a bunch of people sitting around that can translate stuff for them. So they have a problem that's different from what the World Bank has. Where the World Bank just translates everything, the IA Institute has to choose what it's going to translate, what it won't translate. Like the World Bank, though, there's just a switch here where you can choose to change your language. This is a Comcast Xfinity site. This is localized, but it's not multilingual. That might be a lie. It might be in Spanish, I don't remember. The localization here is odd, though. It's not like it occurs at two levels. One, if you're not in the US, all of the content licensing deals are only for America. So if you come from an IP address that's based in Canada or somewhere else in the world, you get an error message that says, go away, or something. The second way it localizes is they know, because you're most likely a Comcast customer, you're most likely on Comcast internet service, they know where you're located, like physically, geographically. So, and because they know where you're located geographically and they have all the program guides for every region, they can actually show content that is local to your region. And they even have the ability, I don't know if they still do this or not, to actually feature content that is more popular in your area. So, say for example, in this case, it's Law & Order SVU. I watch this all the time, so they might know, right? They might know it's me. But it's very possible that maybe Law & Order SVU is very popular in Houston, but in Dallas it's Law & Order CI, so when you came to the site, you see Law & Order CI there instead. And they're also able to give you a specific program guide, right? Because of course they're giving you your TV. So they localize your content at numerous levels. This is the Verizon Fios site, the internet site for the Spanish language version of the site. It's multilingual, it's not localized. So as you can see here, they kind of default to Spanish because the advertising for this specific URL goes out to Spanish audiences. So they decide to default it to Spanish, whereas you saw in the IA Institute site, they default to English. And this is an application. Applications are probably even more difficult. On the web, people kind of assume things that they break, they're not in your language, that's just how it is. There's a lot of assumption the web's going to suck at some point. and either kind of go with what you get or you don't. With applications, especially when you have a large organization paying you a lot of money to build an application, you don't really have that kind of luxury, right? It just has to work. This is multilingual and localized. The localization is kind of a lie. In this case, you're using localization to determine what language to give you by default. So if you sign on to this application from China, right, then you see the interface with default is Chinese. It's easy to go to the preferences and change it, but it assumes you want Chinese. And in the US and Canada, it assumes you want English, even if you're in Quebec, where they probably know you're going to switch it to French, but they didn't want to mess with getting that detailed. So this kind of gives you a sense of the range of options you have, like what can be localized and what you can and can't translate. And this is Yelp that I included because it's multilingual and localized. I didn't work on the site. This is just, I needed an example that was this last piece of the matrix here. No matter what city you arrive in, you come there and it shows the city you're in. Sometimes this is annoying, like sometimes if I have to travel for work, I'll be looking for a restaurant back in Houston, but I'll be in Cleveland, and it keeps wanting to show me stuff for Cleveland, and I want to look for stuff in Houston. So that's one of the issues with localization, is sometimes you get it wrong, or your guess is incorrect. The user wants to do something else. So these are some of the important questions to ask about when you're working with translating sites. Right? So multilingual, of course, means it's available in multiple languages. So you have to ask yourself, what languages are you going to translate, right? So because it costs money, time, and there's a huge development cost up front in order to enable the multilingual work. And then if you have any type of changes in content, you have to have a content manager that can go and put in the different versions, right, for the edits. So it's a significantly larger maintenance cost going down the line. And the second thing you need to answer is what content you're going to translate. So as I mentioned, the World Bank, they translate everything. They just send it down the hall to somebody who knows whatever language they need, and then the person translates it and emails it back over. The IA Institute, though, can't do that. So they kind of work more like Wikipedia. If they have it translated, they'll give you the option to look at the other translation, but if they don't have it translated, well, then you get the English version. So in that sense, they've kind of made an accessibility call there that at a minimum level, their minimum level of accessibility is that the content will be available in English. Now, I don't think this is 100% true for all content on the site. I think some things, articles have come up from, there's like an active community in Brazil, so I think there's maybe a few things in Portuguese that are not available that have not been translated to English. But those are the kind of things that you have to wrestle with. But the next thing is that all content is accessible. And on this last project, it's a sales CRM application for like a global vehicle dealer. That was the black and orange screen. One of the things that really bit us as we were going through is that we prepared our normal list of strings to send off to the translator. But in the course of developing a really smooth user experience that was intended for kind of like the man off the street to walk in and use, there was a lot of content that we did not assume needed to be translated that obviously did need to be translated. So essentially anything, anywhere, ever has to be translated. So some of the things that we did get was the content on the page, right? That's pretty obvious, including like things like form field labels. We forgot to translate the title tags. So that means that for the large user bases that we have in like France and China and South America, they're going to see the browser bar will be in English, and they won't know what they're looking at necessarily. Hopefully they will. Maybe they won't. We didn't translate meta descriptions, which I don't know how we missed that, but if they run searches on the site, we can't guarantee, unless they actually put the data in themselves, if we put it in for them, we can't guarantee it's going to be the language that they need to be able to read. Tooltips are something we totally forgot about. We had them in there everywhere, but we didn't think about translating tooltips. So if you're in Chinese, the entire interface is in Chinese, but you hover over an element and you get a nice tooltip in English. I think they're trying to fix that because that's annoying, but we just forgot about tooltips. We had form field helper text. Those are things like next to your username that says, please use your email address to log in, right? Success warning and error messages were things that we kind of like, we knew we were going to have it, but we designed them later on, so they didn't make the first round of translations. Error pages, like the 404, 503 error pages that you get if you go to a wrong URL, there's a problem with the server. If you have site down shingles, like the site goes down for maintenance, and you put just a nice page up there so they don't freak out. Abbreviations, right? So this is one of the last things we're working through is we don't spell out Wednesday because Wednesday is really long. But we actually had to go and research whether or not you could abbreviate Wednesday in all languages. So in German and French, you can. In Chinese, you can't. They just have a short character for Wednesday. So it was a non-issue. And I think that's an important part about the translation process, and this is something everybody knows, is that things aren't necessarily direct translation, right? So like if you, I like to go to lots of hole-in-wall restaurants, and here in Houston, you go to lots of Mexican restaurants. And when I lived in DC, I'd go to Mexican restaurants, and you walk in and the food is not Mexican food. That's because up there, Mexican restaurants give you food from Mexico, whereas here in Houston, a lot of times we say Mexican, we're talking about Tex-Mex. So there isn't a one-to-one trip there. And the last part is announcements, and this is the last part. So if you know the site is going to go down on Sunday for maintenance, and you want to tell everybody this using the application is going to be down in 2 days for maintenance, you put up an announcement. Well, we thought we were golden, right? We actually thought about designing announcements, which is something people usually forget about. But then someone said, well, what if it's in Chinese? And we're like, oh, well, now we have to have an entire content management system that can manage multiple versions of a single piece of content and serve up the correct one based on the language. And then what if the administrators can't get something translated? Do you just give them the English version? What if you don't have an English version? What if right now it's administered by people here in America, but next year it's administered by people down in Buenos Aires, and they don't do English first? What if they do Spanish first? Do you just give everybody Spanish, or do you not get the announcement, or what do you do? I'm not sure how they resolve all these questions. That was thankfully not my problem at that point. So localize gets wonky, right? Because that means the content changes based on where you're located. So one of the big questions is how do you choose a location, right? You can use IP address. If you're on a phone, you can use GPS. And on some sites, like on weather sites, they'll get your zip code, get your zip code instead as a cookie, so every time you come back, right, they know what zip code you're in. That can also be annoying, though. For example, if I'm in Cleveland trying to see what the weather is like here in Houston, I have to go and tell them to change it to Houston. That's okay sometimes. And the other thing is like what locations matter. So if you think about the Comcast Xfinity example, they had kind of broad swaths of location, right? One was, are they someone who's within our content distribution deal, right? So within the United States, right, not Canada. Are they someone, are we going to do kind of a broad cut like that, or do we actually dive down and have a specific zip code, or know exactly what cable package they have, for example? And the last thing is you have to think about what if you determine the wrong location. And this happens. I mean, I remember using Yelp in the past where I was in Houston looking for stuff in Houston, but assumed that I was in some city I'd never been to. I think it kept defaulting me to someplace in California. It's probably a developer mistake. But you have to make it easy to change the location. And I think that's also true. That's true for language. You have to make it easy for them to change the language, if you expect they're going to change it. And the last complex part of localization is that the content changes, and you have to ask yourself like what content changes. So on the Xfinity site, for example, does the front page the same for everybody, or do you actually serve up the popular show in that area, right? Or and how does it change? Is it just once a day? Do you have different graphics for day and night? So like some of those sites will give you different weather graphics. If it's clear at night, it's a dark image. If it's clear in the day, it's a lighter image. You have the sun or moon there. If it's sunny or if the moon's full or half full, right? It gets real complex real fast. And am I missing a slide here? All right. It gets real complex real fast because you have your content here, and it becomes optional, right? You have all these conditionals you throw in based on locational language, and if you're splicing on locational language, you have to decide, what decision to make. So, for example, with the Verizon Fios website, we assume they're going to arrive at the site, and we're going to give them the Spanish version. But we had specific URLs for all the pages had a URL for Spanish and a separate URL for English with the language code in it. If they come to the English URL, do we give them the Spanish anyway? And then something that our usability testing revealed is that Spanish speakers usually switch to the English version of the site, regardless if they're fluent in Spanish, because they trust the content of the English version better. They just assume that the Spanish site will not be as good as the English site, so they switch over anyway. Until we actually had the discussion, well, if we have a Spanish ad and we give them the Spanish URL and they arrive at the site, we show them English anyway, because that's what they're going to switch to. There's no right answer, right? These are just questions you have to ask yourself. What language do they expect to see? What language do they actually going to read, regardless of their expectations? And then it's not that, and then the really bad thing about this is that the way we design experiences now, I wouldn't even say here in the next few years, the way we design experiences now is that location language aren't the only conditions, right? The interfaces that we have, at any point that we start to try and tailor them to our users, become massively complex. So we've been talking about localizing and translating, but if you think about users' role, right? Are they an admin? Are they someone off the public? Are they a signed-in customer? Are they a potential customer? Is it you need to change it by time of day, by time of device? And then you have to remember that a lot of the content you get now comes from services, right? So for a while, the Xfinity site had an entire backend where they kind of sucked in IMDb and made it look nice. And that was an amazing design problem because everything on the page at that point was conditional, right? Do we know the movie title, or are we guessing the title? Do we know the year it was made? Do we have a range of years? Do we know the network or the studio? If we know the network or studio, do we have a deal with them so we show the logo, or do we mention who it is? Do we know the cast? Do we have the cast separated by director and crew and actors and actresses, or do we just have a list of people? Do we have a photo, right? Do we have a synopsis? Is the synopsis long or short? Do we have reviews? Do we know if it's available anywhere, right? So we're going to link to it on Netflix, on Amazon, as it can be on demand on Comcast at some point in time. At some point in time, the interfaces are entirely 100% conditional. The only thing that's static might be your global navigation. I would even say your logo is static. A lot of times people will change their logos for holidays and stuff. I mean, you're probably familiar with the Google Doodles, right? Every time there's a holiday, they just kind of throw up something different. It becomes massively complex very quickly, and so it's important that you're asking yourself the questions. And I think probably the chief questions you would ask yourself are, what is the user expecting? And regardless of what they're expecting, once they arrive, what will they actually do when they use it? So I believe that is it. Yes, any questions about either the sites or the distinctions?
Are you using an out-of-the-box content management system that does the language switching, or did you write that yourself?
For a lot of big projects, you just kind of write it yourself, but it's all bespoke code, but it's pretty there's a pretty well-defined patterns for it. So first off, but second off, there is no out-of-the-box content management system that does this well. They all lie. And in fact, all content management systems do not manage content well. They all lie. They all don't either don't give you enough metadata fields so you can manage your content, or they force you to use fields or processes that you don't use. So even if you use out-of-the-box, you always have to customize.
Have you found that people maybe just go ahead and use like the Google Translate or one of the in the web browser sort of translation?
Yeah, we did see that.
I mean, is it even? I mean, the question is it even worth spending all that time to make a, you know, if your audience is just going to use a translation tool for just the little bits and pieces that they need?
Well, I think that really depends on what your user is expecting, right? So if I'm trying to buy internet and I just click on a banner ad and go to BIOS and I can't read the site, well, I'll just leave, right? I'm not going to bother with it. If I'm someone who's new to information architecture and I'm bopping around the IA Institute site and there's something there that looks interesting but some Portuguese, but I really want to know what it says, but I'm not sure, then I might try the Google Translate.
Austin. Thanks. All right, I'd like to thank you all again for coming, and thanks very much to all of our presenters today and our organizers. I'd like to invite you all to a reception out here in the Lovett Lounge now.